Hi folks, I'm pro saxophonist Jamie Anderson. You're watching Get Your Sax Together. This video is part 3 of my 4-part series on harmony for beginners, taking you from zero to hero. In the last part we covered what chords are and how you find the notes out. But now in this part we're really going to get to the magic and look at how those chords link together in functional harmony to make up the songs that we all know and love. So this video is part 3 of this 4-part series on harmony. In part 1 we covered the absolute basics. In part 2 we covered how chords are constructed and how you notate them. In this part we're going to get right into how you link up those chords to actually form real music. Really cool stuff. There is a free PDF linked down below in the description, so be sure to go and get that. That is wicked and really invaluable to help you follow along as we go through the lesson. And as usual, do share the love and subscribe to the channel and ring the bell to be notified of new videos if you like what you're seeing. So I'm going to jump behind the lens, get behind the screen for the lesson, and I'll see you there in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail. Okay, welcome behind the curtain, welcome behind the screen. So the first thing to understand about how chords move, or functional harmony, is that in Western music, music is based on tension and release. A chord is tense and wants to go somewhere and then is resolved. So for example, this chord, which is G7, wants to resolve to C. And then you get home and you think, So let's have a look at this with the chord types that we've learned in the second video on the harmony. So first of all, our major 7 chord. Now our major 7 chord is used as our home bass. It doesn't have any tension and it doesn't really want to pull anywhere. It's perfectly happy where it is. By contrast, the dominant 7 chord or 7 chord feels like it wants to pull somewhere. So for example, this chord feels like it wants to pull somewhere, and the place it wants to pull to is here, of course. This is the basic dominant to root movement that most Western music is based on. And it turns out that dominant 7th chords pull to a home key a 5th lower. So in other words, a 7 chord on the 5th of that key will want to pull you back home to the root. By the way, another word for root is tonic. So you could say the tonic of the chord. Sadly, you can't mix it with gin and a slice of lemon, but it's also useful to use Roman numerals to number each note of the home scale so that we can see patterns that apply within any key. So going back to what I just said a few seconds ago, we can see that the dominant to root cadence is a chord 5, in this case G, to chord 1, in this case C. So G7 wants to pull, that's chord 5, wants to pull to chord 1, which is C major 7. Once you look for that 5 to 1 progression, you'll see it absolutely everywhere in music, from Green Day to Mozart. In case you hadn't noticed, the chord notes of G7, G, B, D, F, are all from the key of C major, which is the key that G7 pulls towards, C major. For our next trick when writing music, we can slightly delay our root home by putting in a minor 7 chord built on the 2nd degree of our home key before we hit that 5 chord that wants to pull us home. Or another way of putting that in Roman numerals is a 2-5-1 pattern, and this is seen especially in jazz standards. So in the key of C major, it would be D minor 7, that's it in root position, to G7, to C major 7. So that sounds nice. And if I just rearrange where the notes are, it sounds like this. A very familiar sound in music. That's a 2-5-1. If we swapped our D minor 7 for an F triad, or an F chord as you'd call it, on the 4th degree of the key, we get the slightly simpler chords that are used in most classic rock and pop and blues songs, which is 4-5-1. So in the key of C, you'd have F, then you'd have G or G7, going back to C. Now you might also have noticed that the chords of D minor 7, the 2 chord in the key of C, just like the 5 chord and the F chord on 4 all come from the scale of C. So the notes of D minor 7 and G7 and F are all derived from the notes of the home key C. This is pretty cool. And the lesson is both the melody notes and the chord notes within a key are derived from the home major scale key. Another way of looking at this is to say that melodies are horizontal expressions of the home major scale, and chords are vertical, stacked expressions of the home major key. This is important for single-line instruments like sax, as we can't play chords. If you want to express the harmonies of the key, we have to do it one note at a time by playing notes of the chords one after the other. So that's all quite interesting stuff. Now then, let's just have a quick recap of what we've learned so far. Western music is based on tension and release. The heart of harmonic tension and release is seen in the dominant to root relationship. The dominant 7th chord 5 of the key resolves to the major 7 chord 1 like this. Chord 5 goes to chord 1. This tension and release can be slightly delayed by adding a minor 7th chord on the chord 2 or a triad on chord 4, which would sound like this: D minor 7, G7, C major 7, or in pop and rock stuff you just have F to G or G7 back to C. Also, the notes of these popular chords can all be found in the major scale of the home key, which is pretty cool. So far, so good. Now that you know what you're looking for, if you go hunting through chord progressions for your favorite songs, you'll see these 2-5-1s and 4-5-1 chords all over the place, and they all use the notes found in the major scale of the key. Let's now look at 2 examples where the chords have notes outside of the home key. And to do this, we're mainly talking about chords typically found in jazz standards, but bear in mind that all functional harmony has its roots in the Western classical tradition. The first example is where we insert a cheeky little dominant chord that throws us to that minor 7-2 chord that we've already covered. It's another harmonic delaying tactic that momentarily delays our gratification of getting back home. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a 7 chord on the 6th degree of the home key. So that is a dominant chord on the 6th note of that major scale. So in the key of C, it would be an A7, for example. Effectively, what we're doing is fooling the ears of the listener, pretend that we're going to the minor key that we've got on chord 2, but then we keep moving through into chord 5 and then back home. So in the key of C, which is often a simple key to look at things as there's no flats or sharps, it would look like A7 to D minor 7 to G7 to C. So that's A7 to D minor 7, G7 to C major 7. And here's that chord sequence written with massive chord symbols. Let's just play that through. A7 takes us to D minor, but then we keep going through to G7, and finally we get back to C major 7. So if we redistribute the notes of those chords, it'll sound a bit more obvious what's going on. So let's try this. A7, D minor 7, G7, C major 7. So the reason this device works is that in the home key of C, we don't have a C sharp normally. So when we're in the key of C, then we hit that A7 chord. This C sharp jumps out because it wants to resolve here to the D minor, which it does, but then it goes through again to G7 and finally home to C, and we're finally back home. So that's the first way that we can start to use notes not in the home key to create more tension. I'm going to show you one more example, and that is a delaying tactic commonly found in jazz standards, and it's called a secondary dominant chord. This involves replacing our minor 7-2 chord with a dominant 7th 2 chord. It's called a secondary dominant because it acts as a dominant chord to the real dominant chord, which is on chord 5. So you might see it as a temporary 5 chord going to the actual 5 chord, which then takes us home. So let's put this into our example of our home key of C now. Normally our 2-5-1 in C is D minor 7, G7, and C major 7. However, we now replace our D minor 7 with the secondary dominant. So instead of D minor 7, it's D7. So let's put that in. So we've now got D7, which then changes to D minor 7, and G7, taking us back to C major 7. So let's just play that through again with these giant chord symbols. We've got a D7 to D minor 7, G7, C. So what's happening is this D7 here, which has got this F sharp in it, this wants to pull to this key, which it does, which is the G7, but it keeps going back to C. So secondary dominant, this D7 is a dominant to this G7, but we just kind of sneak in the D minor 7 to smooth the gap between the two. So this harmonic trick is used all over the place in all sorts of jazz tunes and standards. However, one really good example of it is in Girl from Ipanema, the bossa nova tune. So I'm going to keep it in C to keep things simple. We start off with C major 7. Then we go to the secondary dominant, which is D7, which changes to D minor 7. Then G7, and then finally we're back home. So that's all we're going to cover today in part 3. We've been through how chords link up, how chord 5 wants to resolve to chord 1, how we can make it into a 2-5-1, and then we've had 2 examples of chords that don't have notes from within the key. First of all, putting a dominant on chord 6, and also the secondary dominant, putting the dominant on chord 2. So I hope you enjoyed the video today. We got into some really cool stuff. We've even started covering secondary dominants and other really groovy stuff like that. So in the final part of this 4-part series, we're going to get really detailed. We're going to cover how guide tones move in chords. We're going to get into extensions, ninths, flat 9s, sharp 11s, you name it. We're going to get into the nitty gritty, so definitely stay tuned for that one. In the meantime, make sure you go and get your free PDF linked in the description below. That's a really cool piece of information that you can use to really bed in the video. If you need to rewatch this video several times, please do. That'll really help it cement the information in your head. And of course, subscribe to the channel if you like what you're seeing, and ring the bell to be notified when I upload new videos. And I'll see you next time on Get Your Sax Together.